Is the United States rehearsing for airstrikes in Venezuela? Over the weekend and this morning, news outlets and newspapers around the world had this splashed on their first page. It seemed like the Pentagon has gone on a bit of an overdrive in sending out a message to what they call narco-terrorists in Venezuela, against whom, remember, the Trump administration has started a whole war in the past couple of months. In a way, we've been telling you about those actions. For days now, the U.S. military has been busy building up its naval presence in the Caribbean. And on Sunday, the U.S. president confirmed that he has spoken to the Venezuelan leader, Nicolás Maduro, in recent days. But before he confirmed that, Trump on Saturday had declared that airspace around Venezuela should be considered closed, which to many sounded like a hint that Trump is considering striking targets on land. On social media, Trump posted, I'm quoting, "To all airlines, pilots, drug dealers and human traffickers, please consider the airspace above and surrounding Venezuela to be closed in its entirety," quote unquote. That was the statement. Now, the story first reported by the Wall Street Journal on Saturday says that the U.S. has been flying simulated attacks against Venezuela using fighter jets, bomber aircraft, citing flight tracking data, as well as defense official. In fact, the WSJ report says that the U.S. rehearsal has been going on in recent weeks, reportedly. As per the report, the U.S. has also been expanding its presence in the Caribbean to allow for an increased tempo in flight operations should Trump choose to move forward on further military action. Just last Wednesday, remember, the president of the Dominican Republic had said he authorized the U.S. to refuel aircraft and transport equipment and personnel at restricted areas within the country to help fight drug trafficking. The announcement was made during a visit by the Secretary of Defense. And if that wasn't enough, the U.S. is also reportedly installing a radar system on the island of Tobago, which sits several miles from Venezuela's coast. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago has said that U.S. Marines were at the airport on the island working on its radar runway road that followed a Tuesday visit by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The WSJ report further says that the U.S. has been using airports in Puerto Rico as well as flying missions of the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier. The reports of U.S. rehearsing for its strike then do not seem all that surprising. Just last week, Trump suggested that land strikes against Venezuela could be imminent. And during Thanksgiving remarks, Trump had said, I'm quoting, "The land is easier. That's going to start very soon. We warned them, stop sending poison into our country," quote unquote. Which then brings us to the question of, can America close another country's airspace? It cannot, but the Federal Aviation Administration can ban U.S. airlines from flying to certain countries or in their airspace. And U.S. carriers have not been flying to Venezuela for some time. The tensions also coming as the U.S. pressures Maduro about his future. Remember, the Trump administration has deemed Maduro an illegitimate leader for alleged vote rigging, drug trafficking, human rights abuses allegedly, and says that he must leave office. In the call last week itself, Trump and Maduro reportedly discussed Venezuela's demands for a general amnesty for Maduro. His senior aides and their families, many of whom face U.S. financial sanctions and criminal indictments. But Trump reportedly told Maduro that if he did not leave willingly, the U.S. would consider other options, including the use of force. Remember, America has deployed a tremendous amount of combat power to the Caribbean, including its most advanced aircraft carrier, several Navy destroyers, F-35B fighter jets, among other weaponry. Since September, the U.S. has also carried out more than 20 controversial strikes against boats that it says were carrying drugs, which have so far killed more than 80 people. A new report revealing that China's powerful military-industrial sector stumbled last year, even as the arms business, on the contrary, surged across the world. Corruption purges inside Beijing's defense structure reportedly disrupted procurement and delayed major weapons contracts, in the process creating uncertainty around China's military modernization. A study released by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute reporting that revenues at China's largest state-owned defense companies dropped sharply in 2024, while defense manufacturers around the world benefited from rising geopolitical tensions and the wars in Eastern Europe and West Asia. Reportedly, China contradicted the trend. According to SIPRI, allegations of corruption inside the procurement process forced Beijing to postpone and cancel several major arms agreements, reportedly. Analysts saying that these disruptions basically raise questions about when China will deliver new military capabilities, and China's People's Liberation Army has been the focus of Xi Jinping's sweeping anti-corruption campaign since 2012, remember. And that campaign hit the top levels of the military last year, when the elite rocket force came under investigation. In October, at least 9 senior generals, including the nation's second highest ranking officer, were expelled from the Communist Party on graft charges. The generals were accused of seriously violating party discipline. At the start of this year, Xi Jinping had described corruption as the biggest threat to the party. Diplomats across Asia and the West are reportedly assessing the impact of the crackdown on China's military rise, as well as how far down the command chain the investigation extends. SIPRI's data alone telling a wider story. Revenues of China's top defense firms fell 10% last year. By contrast, Japan's military revenue jumped 40%, Germany's by 36%. And the United States posted a 3.8% rise. Worldwide, the 100 biggest weapons producers reached a record $679 billion in revenue. In fact, China's downturn made the Asia-Oceania region the only one to show an overall decline. The slump coming despite 3 decades of expanding Chinese defense budgets. Beijing, remember, has invested heavily in building the world's largest navy and coast guard fleets, hypersonic missiles, nuclear weapons, advanced drones reportedly. Yet procurement slowdowns reportedly threaten delivery timelines. The revenue hit reportedly affected all of China's major heavyweight defense firms. SIPRI researchers saying leadership changes triggered by corruption allegations led to government reviews, project delays, and slower delivery of weapon systems. Experts warn that the timeline for the PLA's rocket force responsible for ballistic, hypersonic, cruise missiles could slip further, adding risk to China's target of reaching full combat readiness by the PLA's centenary in 2027. However, defense analysts also believe Beijing will not scale back military investments in the long term. They expect sustained funding for modernization, but with tighter oversight, higher costs, and delayed programs. China's military pressure on Taiwan has reached levels unseen in decades, with near daily incursions by PLA jets, warships circling the island, grey zone harassment, as it is called, that also increasingly targets civilian aircraft, reportedly. Taipei's armed forces are stretched, its budget is rising sharply, and the government there is now warning that national defense can no longer be left to the military alone. At a time like this, Taiwan is turning to an unprecedented strategy, bringing civilian companies directly into the island's intelligence and surveillance effort. One small airline, better known for pilot training and charter flights, is now offering to help track Chinese warships off Taiwan's coast, using its own aircraft and its own radar. And now this is part of Taiwan's new whole-of-society security push, basically. Flying low over Taiwan's eastern coastline, the 11-seater aircraft is already running demonstration missions under its belly, a powerful US-made synthetic aperture radar, capable of detecting objects smaller than 10 centimeters, capable of detecting objects smaller than 10 centimeters. The company is saying it wants to stream that data directly to Taiwan's military and Coast Guard as the Chinese naval activity intensifies, more frequent, and also is more aggressive in a way. Now, this is not a defense contractor. It's known for pilot training and charter flights, but is now pitching itself to a government that is calling on civilian businesses, research groups, and even tech firms to support the readiness there. In case China attacks, say, tomorrow, this includes building backup communications, strengthening logistics, hardening the cyber defenses, and now potentially contributing to surveillance and intelligence gathering. This civil-military partnership is common in countries like the United States, but for a small part of the world there, whose forces are stretched by daily Chinese incursions, this is new territory. The Taiwanese government is already preparing to raise the defense spending to 5% of the GDP by 2030 and has announced a new $40 billion supplementary budget. That includes major US arms purchases. These are significant developments. Now, this airline also hopes its surveillance service will become part of this build-up. It says the urgency is clear. Taiwan's defense ministry, in fact, has responded cautiously. It says it has no current plans to cooperate, but that it does welcome discussions on public-private collaboration. And experts are warning that there are legal and also safety questions here. Taiwan currently has no clear legal framework for civilian aircraft conducting reconnaissance. Private operators could be vulnerable in the event of Chinese military engagement. In fact, early this year, one of the medical charter flights near Kinmen, just off China's coast, was approached multiple times by Chinese aircraft over 3 days. The government condemned the incident reportedly as part of China's grey zone harassment. The airline acknowledges the risks, but it also says it is pushing ahead. Taiwan's new defense initiative is already drawing in companies with no military background as such, reportedly. Another highlight here is a new generation of sea drones built by Thunder Tiger, better known for remote control model cars and boats. Now, these drones can basically carry 1,200 kilograms of explosives and travel 500 kilometers, featuring prominently at a defense industry showcase this summer. The Coast Guard, meanwhile, says it is prioritizing new drone reconnaissance before eventually expanding into manned flights. Still, senior Taiwanese security officials are saying that these joint civilian-military initiatives are no longer optional. As China intensifies its military activity around the island, Taiwan is now signaling that defense is no longer the responsibility of just the armed forces, but of the entire society. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.